Hey everybody, my name is Steven and welcome back to the Storytime channel. Without wasting any time, let's get into our stories of the day. Neighbor's gutter is flooding my property, didn't want to fix. Okay, I'll pay. Now I won't. Happened about 2 years ago. Friend reminded me of this today. My next door neighbor's house is slightly elevated higher than mine. His gutter is not buried into a drainage system. It floods my side yard when it rains and has progressed to flooding my front yard. I have had nice conversations in the past, but he is totally racist when referring to the people who live across the street, who are wonderful, nice people. I approached him about a year ago prior and asked him if we could jointly work on drainage issues. He dismissed me immediately and said, "I don't have any effing money to spend." I said, "Okay, no problem," and let it go for 6 months. I approached him again one day when he was outside and said I would like to fix it, and I will get 3 estimates on the work, and I will pay for it, since I am such a nice guy and I had just gotten a bonus at work and I am tired of walking through a mud pit. He didn't say anything and I told him I would get back to him with a plan and need him to sign off for HOA approval. I am getting estimates around $2,500 to bury his downspouts and tie in drains in the ground and run 2 pop-off valves in the back of the house. All 3 estimates wanted to do virtually the same work at around the same cost. So I contact the HOA and put in a request to fix. They then go to him for approval and he says I will not allow him to do the work on my house. Now I am thinking, your water runoff is flooding my yard and you don't want to approve and allow me to pay? The HOA comes back and said we talked to him and he does not want you to fix the issue. 90% of the water is coming from his downspout. So here comes the compliance part. I ended up putting in a walkway with shrubs on the side of the house, but that doesn't fix the flooding issue. Only helps that I don't have to walk in it. I then filed multiple complaints against my neighbor with the HOA for the damage it caused. They send complaint letters to him telling him that if he doesn't fix the problem, he will be fined. He had to hire his own company and fix his own drains the exact way that I was going to do them. Then he asked me if I was going to pay, and I smiled and told him to go F off. I feel like I would have done the same thing. You're offering to do it for free and he turns that down? What would you have done in this situation? Let me know in the comments below. Height approved. This isn't my story, but my parents'. It was probably the first time I witnessed malicious compliance and I still remember it well. It was about 25 years ago, so I was about 8, and we had just moved into a 150-year-old house that was in need of major repairs. My dad, thinking ahead, knew he would need a large garage or workshop to really get started on the renovations properly. On the edge of our yard was an ancient barn that was falling apart and needed to be torn down. My dad figured this was the best place to build his new workshop, so that was the plan. We had met and were on good terms with all the neighbors at that point. When the plans for the new workshop were finished, my parents went around to all the neighbors as a courtesy to show them the plans and get their blessings. The neighbors whose property the current barn and new workshop would border, I'll call them the Peters, were concerned about the height. The existing barn was 16 feet high, and they asked if we could only build it 1 story, 12-foot max, as to not block the sun in their yard. Sure, no problem, my parents agreed. They wanted to go 2 stories for extra storage, but just 1 wasn't a deal breaker. So the old barn was torn down and the foundation laid for the new one. During that time, there was a falling out with the Peters and my parents. I'm not sure what happened, but it turned nasty. One day, my brother and I were playing street hockey and Mr. Peters came out yelling at us. "Get off the road, you half-breed craps!" My dad is black, so we're both half black. "You have to earn your place in this town." Upon hearing this, my mom had to physically restrain my dad from going over and beating the living poop out of him. Eventually, he cooled off and started on his plan. The plans for 1 story went out the window. Soon, the new garage that was only supposed to be 1 story gained a 2nd in the blueprints. If they were going to be directing racist comments at his kids, my dad would build what he wanted. As construction started, The Peters came over to ask why there was 2 stories being built and were told to go freak themselves. We didn't hear from them again until the roof started to go on. The bylaws of the township limited all out structures to 24 feet high. The Peters called the township and then a building inspector claiming that the new garage was over 24 feet high. If it was over height, the entire thing would have to be torn down and rebuilt, costing us tens of thousands of dollars. I remember the Peters standing there watching the inspector with smug looks on their faces. 2 days later, we got the final report back from township and inspector. 23 feet, 11 inches, just as my dad had drawn up in his new plans. He sent me up on the roof of the garage, just plywood, no shingles yet, with some spray paint and had me write 23 feet, 11 inches, height approved, in 2-foot high neon orange letters across the entire roof, facing their yard and house. Not only did the garage block all sunlight from reaching their yard, but my dad waited until everything else was done before he shingled that side of the roof. They had to stare at those neon orange letters for almost 3 years. It may not be much, but it certainly ruined the enjoyment of their newly darkened yard, and there was nothing that could be done about it, because it was height approved. They didn't comply with the Peters' request, but they certainly complied with the bylaws as maliciously as they could. Sounds to me like the Peters deserve to live in shade. So, you won't pay me for the additional 1 hour I work, but still claim it from the client? I will stop working for 1 hour. In 2003, I started working on a new dairy processing plant project in Saudi Arabia. The electromechanical works were done by a British company who worked from inside the dairy company's plant premises and did not have a valid contracting license to do work in Saudi Arabia. The contract between the dairy company and the electromechanical company was made in the UK, and the electromechanical company worked inside the dairy plant premises as their representatives to avoid legal hassles. I was hired by the electromechanical company through a manpower company run by a totally shady and creepy dude. At that time, I was slightly obese, and in order to cut down on my weight, I never had any lunch breaks. I used to work straight from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., totaling 9 hours, 1 hour additional to the usual 8 hours. I was paid a fixed salary by the manpower company, but they charged the British electromechanical company on an hourly basis at a very high rate. After 2 months, I learned that they were billing the electromechanical company for my time for 9 hours while they were not paying a corresponding salary to me. I cross-checked with my boss, the project manager at the electromechanical company, and he confirmed. So I took it up with the shady dude at the manpower company and informed him that if they are billing for 9 hours for me to the client, I should have a corresponding increase in pay. He refused outright. I requested the dude again for a raise 1 month later and was refused. Okay, 2 can play the game. I informed the electromechanical company's project manager that henceforth I will start taking my lunch break, even if I don't eat anything, and they should pay attention to the timesheet the manpower company submits for billing my time. The month comes to an end and the manpower company submits the invoice for my time, with 9 hours marked as daily hours worked, and was rejected outright. The electromechanical company project manager informed the shady dude that they cannot bill for time not worked. They came to me. They asked me to work during the lunch breaks and I refused outright. They pleaded and I agreed if they start paying for that additional 1 hour for the past 4 months and for every future month. They had to agree. I went back to working the lunch breaks and I started getting paid for the additional hour too. I made a good amount. Good on OP for sticking up for themselves and making sure that in the end they're getting what they deserved. Are you sure you want to play this game? Years ago, I worked for a family-run business. I usually worked 40+ hours every week, and when my first check didn't reflect time and a half, I went to the accounting person who informed me that time and a half was not a benefit we offer. Okay, it's a federal law, but whatever. Fast forward months of working for the company, 40 plus hours a week. One day I decided to test for a city job. No guarantee I would get it, but it was a full day test on a weekday. I had to ask for a day off. Keep in mind, I had only used one vacation day until this point. Being honest, I told them what I needed it for and that I wasn't even sure if I'd get the job. They granted the day, however, when I got back the day after, I was fired. I applied for unemployment as the firing was a surprise. Someone from the unemployment office called to tell me that my request was denied, as my former employer stated that I had received warnings. I had not. I replied, interesting. Since I have an email from my manager from earlier the week I was fired, saying what a great job I was doing, and our customers loved me, and they don't pay time and a half overtime. Unemployment guy says he'll call me back. On callback, he advises he overrode the denial and I would be getting my unemployment and who I should call to file a complaint for the unpaid wages. Didn't think twice. Took all the copies of all my pay stubs and timesheets and filed the complaint. They launched an investigation and he was non-compliant with their requests for a meeting. Got to the point that the investigator just showed up one day and walked into his office. They demanded his books and every employee, past and present for something like 7 years prior, got paid what they were owed. Plus, he had to pay a penalty. All while another company was in negotiations to merge with his. Needless to say, I don't think the merging worked out very well for them, I assume, after something like that came to the surface. Their neighbors sued them for wanting to add another story to their house, so my grandparents built 2. So, to establish some things, the parents of my father own a couple of apartment complexes in this big city, Germany. They, as well as me and my parents, all live in this one house, but in different apartments. My father grew up in this house and never moved away. I will probably one day move to another floor. I'm 19 years old, but don't intend to leave this house. My grandpa just told me that in the early 80s, it used to be just 1 story high. So really just a very long but super short house, if that makes sense. I'm living on the 3rd floor at the moment, so I asked how this came to pass. What he told me was absolutely hilarious. Okay, now the story. My grandparents wanted to add another floor or story to this very long and flat house. So they obviously contacted the authorities and got all the paperwork done. Everything was fine. Then their neighbor found out about this and got really mad. He owned and still owns some other apartment complexes in the same area and on the same street. He inherited those complexes from his father. My grandparents reminded the neighbor that they had a deal with the neighbor's father that if my grandparents wanted to add more floors to their houses, then the neighbor would comply as long as he could also add more floors. All the neighbor had to say to this was, "Yeah, that's what my father said to you, but now he's dead and I don't want you to add another floor to your house. I'll sue you if you do that." To which my grandpa just replied in his sweetest voice, "Alright, do it." The reason why the neighbor could sue us for adding another floor was some weird clause in the German law that had existed at the time that stated that a house could only be so high so that the houses next to it would get a specific amount of sun and air, so that it wouldn't cast too big of a shadow on the other houses around. My grandpa knew this was BS because a few houses in this area already had like 7 floors, so it wouldn't be an inconvenience if our house would stock up. So he went to court. He told me that there was literally a court meeting and a trial on the street in front of our house. He brought a lawyer, his attorney, police officers, and some specialists from the State Department with him. There, the specialist said that our house could actually be 3 floors tall without robbing this neighbor of any of his air and sun. With the attorney and lawyer as witnesses, everything was settled. Then the neighbor came over and had a fit, screaming and huffing the whole time and demanded that it should be only 1 floor at most. My grandpa said, "Alright, we'll do 1 floor and then we're gonna see what we'll do next." They built the floor. And then, because that's what the specialist said, built another. Right as when the workers wanted to start work on the second added, so in total third, floor, the neighbor comes flying. Demands to know why they're doing one more than they said they'll do. Police were called. The police, already very tired of this whole situation, and especially with the neighbor, told my grandpa to continue building because the concrete was already mixed and ready to use. This house is now 3 floors high. I don't really know what happened to the neighbor because I never met him, but my grandpa said that they're fine now. There was some kind of a story that ended up with my grandpa actually building walls around some of the windows of the 3rd floor because the neighbor demanded some BS about fireproof windows. Definitely fireproof if you ask me. The neighbor kind of fundamentally upsets me. There's no rule being broken. There's no issue with the house being that high. He has no right to complain. He has no say in the matter. But with that being said, that's all the stories we have for today. So what I want to know is which of these stories was the most interesting to you? Let me know which one it was in the comments below. And thank you all so much for watching and listening to the Storytime channel. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing and don't forget to turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. Thank you all again for watching and listening to the Storytime channel.